Welcome to the U.S. English Lab. Let's master your English together.
From the very moment you were born, you were basically handed this cultural script.
Oh, absolutely. We all get one.
Right. It was woven into the stories you were told, the lessons you learned in school, even just casual remarks made by your family around the dinner table.
Yeah, the ambient noise of growing up.
Exactly. And that script dictates one absolute rule, right? Putting yourself first makes you a toxic, selfish narcissist.
Which is such a heavy burden to carry.
It really is. I mean, you are taught that virtue requires total self-sacrifice. Like, prioritizing your own needs is somehow a fundamental character flaw.
It is arguably the most pervasive and honestly the most damaging psychological inheritance we receive.
Yeah.
We're just walking around feeling this ambient, low-grade guilt simply for wanting to take care of our own minds and bodies.
Right, because the prevailing narrative demands that you pour everything you have into others until you are just completely hollowed out.
But the thing is, clinical psychology, neurobiology, and, well, decades of peer-reviewed data are now proving that script isn't just slightly off the mark.
No, it's completely backward, biologically and logically.
Completely backward. The human nervous system simply does not function the way our cultural morality tales suggest it does.
Yeah, you can't run an engine on an empty tank.
Exactly. If you constantly operate at a deficit, denying your own fundamental need for care, your physiological and psychological architecture basically begins to collapse.
So today on the Deep Dive, we are dismantling that cultural script. We're unpacking a controversial but scientifically non-negotiable imperative, which is you must learn to love yourself more than anyone else.
It sounds so taboo just saying it out loud, doesn't it?
It really does. But we have to get over that. And for those of you listening to, sharpen your English today, we are going to do something dual purpose here.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah. So we're decoding cutting-edge clinical psychology data, like a massive study on weight stigma in Indonesia and cognitive behavioral therapy frameworks. But we're also arming you with the precise English vocabulary and idioms required to articulate these profound ideas.
Because you can't rewire your brain if you don't have the right words to write the new code.
Exactly. We're going to naturally walk you through idioms like, falling flat on your face, which just means to fail embarrassingly so you can effortlessly master the language while we rebuild your psychology.
Language really does construct our internal reality.
Right.
If you use the wrong terminology to navigate your inner life, you will inevitably end up lost.
So let's start right there. Let's look at the language. If I open a standard English thesaurus right now and look up self-love, I'm immediately hit with synonyms like self-esteem, self-acceptance, and self-compassion.
Yeah, they are all just lumped into the exact same bucket.
Which, from a clinical perspective, is basically a disaster, right?
It's a complete disaster. It's like opening a toolbox, pointing at a hammer, a saw, a screwdriver, and a wrench, and just calling them all tools for hitting things.
Right. If you hit a screw with a hammer, you're going to break the wood.
Exactly. They perform entirely different functions. Mixing them up causes immense psychological damage.
So break open this toolbox for us. Let's isolate these terms for our listeners and figure out what they actually do, starting with the biggest one, self-love.
Okay, so fundamentally, self-love is an effective motivational foundation.
Okay, a foundation.
Right. It is not an action you perform. It is an underlying orientation. It's the unconditional, deeply rooted belief that you are inherently worthy of care, respect, and protection.
So if we think about building a house, self-love is the concrete foundation poured into the ground.
Yes, perfect analogy.
Yeah.
It doesn't actively do the work of keeping the rain out, but nothing else can be built without it. It's the soil from which all other positive psychological states grow.
Okay, so self-love is the baseline state of worthiness. But what happens when the storm hits the house? What is self-compassion?
So self-compassion is your active emotion regulation strategy. It is dynamic.
Like it moves, it does something.
Exactly. It is the medicine you apply to the wound. You don't necessarily need self-compassion when you're just sitting on a beach enjoying a sunset.
Right, you need it when things go horribly wrong.
You need it when you fail a major exam, or when you experience a brutal breakup, or when you make a humiliating mistake at work and fall flat on your face.
Which means to fail in a very obvious public way.
Right. Self-compassion is how you actively soothe your own nervous system during those moments of acute distress.
Okay, so self-love is the concrete foundation. Self-compassion is the active medicine. Where does self-acceptance fit into this architecture?
Self-acceptance is a stable, cognitive evaluative outcome. which is a fancy way of saying it is pure objectivity.
Objective, meaning not influenced by personal feelings or opinions, just the facts.
Just the facts.
Ah.
It is the ability to look at the totality of who you are, your brilliant strengths, your embarrassing flaws, your triumphs, and your darkest failures, and integrate them without demanding external validation.
So I'm not throwing a party to celebrate my flaws.
No, not at all. You aren't necessarily cheering for your flaws, but you accept them as factual components of your reality.
That brings us to the trap, doesn't it?
The big one.
The one term everyone chases. The one we teach in schools. The one plastered on inspirational posters in every corporate office. Self-esteem.
Yes. Self-esteem is a highly conditional, performance-based evaluation.
Conditional meaning it only exists if certain rules are met.
Exactly. It is entirely predicated on a social hierarchy.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is, because self-esteem requires you to look around the room, measure your achievements, your physical appearance, or like your bank account against everyone else, and conclude that you are doing better than them.
So it's a competition.
It is an endless, exhausting judgment of your comparative value.
Okay, let me synthesize this for the listener. Tell me if this analogy holds up neurologically.
Go for it.
If my brain is a smartphone, self-love is the lithium-ion battery. It's the energy source powering the entire device.
I like that, yes.
Self-compassion is the antivirus software. It runs quietly in the background, but actively kicks into high gear the moment a malicious virus or glitch attacks the system.
Spot on.
And self-acceptance is the actual operating system, right? The stable environment that just runs the hardware exactly as it is without trying to pretend it's a different, newer model.
That is a remarkably accurate mapping of the clinical definitions.
And if we follow that logic, self-esteem is a poorly coded social media app.
Oh, absolutely.
It just sits on your home screen, constantly pinging you with push notifications, comparing your device to everyone else's device. And in the process, it drains your battery down to zero.
It drains the battery entirely because it demands constant outward attention.
So we need to uninstall the app.
Basically, yes. This is why rational emotive behavior therapy, or REBT, focuses so heavily on neutralizing self-esteem.
Tell us a bit about REBT.
Well, REBT posits that human beings are, by definition, inherently fallible.
Yeah.
You are biologically programmed to make mistakes.
We are glitchy hardware.
We are. Therefore, REBT argues that you must sever the link between your core worth and your daily output.
Severing the link, like cutting a cord. In other words, you stop making a global evaluation of your identity based on a localized event.
Exactly. A person operating with high self-esteem fails a test and thinks, I failed the test, therefore I am a failure.
Right. Their entire identity collapses.
But a person operating under the REBT framework of unconditional self-acceptance says, I am a deeply complex, inherently fallible human being who happened to fail a test today.
So the failure is just an event that occurred. It is not an identity they embody.
Exactly.
But let's be realistic about where you, the listener, might be sitting right now.
Right.
If you have spent the last 20 years acting as your own worst enemy, aggressively criticizing every move you make, the concept of self-love is going to feel pretty absurd.
Oh, it feels entirely unnatural.
Right.
Yeah.
It feels like putting on a clown suit and looking in the mirror to recite affirmations. It feels completely fake.
Which is precisely why the clinical literature offers a transitional concept. We call it self-neutrality.
Self-neutrality. Okay, how does that work?
Well, you do not have to jump from self-hatred to profound self-love in one afternoon. That is an impossible leap.
Yeah, nobody can do that.
So self-neutrality offers a pressure relief valve. It is pure, unemotional observation.
Give me an example of what self-neutrality sounds like in your head.
Instead of forcing yourself to say, I am incredibly beautiful and I love every inch of my body, which your brain might immediately reject as a lie.
Because you've hated it for so long.
Right. Instead of that, you practice saying, I have a human body. It requires food. It transports me from place to place.
Wow. Just entirely neutral?
Yes. Or instead of saying, I am a genius who made a tiny error, you say, I sent an email. It contained a typographical error. No positive spin, no negative downward spiral. You just document the reality.
You're just reporting the news of your life without adding the editorial commentary. I really like that.
It takes so much pressure off.
But this brings us to the massive cultural roadblock. If we know that the battery is self-love and we need it to run the machinery of our lives, why are we so terrified of charging it?
Because of the cultural script we talked about at the beginning.
Right. Why is society deeply suspicious of anyone who overtly prioritizes their own needs?
Because we have undergone a massive cultural conflation between self-love and narcissism.
Inflation, meaning we've merged two distinct things into one.
Exactly. We view them as the exact same thing. To untangle this, our sources point us to a foundational text, Erich Fromm's 1939 essay, Selfishness and Self-Love.
1939. So we've been dealing with this psychological bottleneck for nearly a century.
And much longer than that, really. It's rooted in various theological and philosophical traditions. Fromm argues that modern culture is paralyzed by a strict taboo on selfishness.
A taboo is something society forbids or frowns upon.
Yes. We are instructed that selfishness is the ultimate sin, and that loving others is the ultimate virtue. But Fromm dissects this and argues that it is linguistically and psychologically incoherent.
Wait, how so? If I love someone else, isn't that inherently a good thing?
Well, love, according to Fromm, is not a finite resource that you distribute. It's not like a pie where if I give you a slice, I have less for myself.
Okay, so what is it?
It is an attitude. It is an active affirmation of growth, happiness, and freedom. And the critical psychological insight here is this. If love is an attitude of affirmation, a readiness to love must fundamentally include oneself.
Oh, I see.
If you are entirely incapable of affirming your own growth and happiness, you do not actually possess the capacity to genuinely love anyone else.
That completely flips the script. We usually assume that self-sacrifice proves our love, like, look how much I'm suffering for you.
Right, but Fromm is saying that if you hate yourself, your love for others is fundamentally broken. It is usually manifestation of dependency or obligation, not genuine love.
Wow, so I'm just acting out of a sense of duty, not love.
Exactly. Maslow and Fromm both work to differentiate between unhealthy selfishness and healthy selfishness.
Let's break those down. What is unhealthy selfishness?
Unhealthy selfishness is what we commonly associate with narcissism. It is rooted in profound psychological poverty. It is a bottomless pit of insatiable needs.
And for our English learners, a bottomless pit is a hole with no bottom. It means a need that can never, ever be satisfied, no matter how much you put into it.
Precisely. Let's drill into that, because the popular understanding of a narcissist is someone who is just obsessed with themselves, right?
Yeah, the stereotype is a guy kissing his own reflection in the mirror.
Right, but it is a complete misconception. Narcissists do not love themselves. In fact, their pathology stems from a terrifying inner void, a profound lack of inner security and worth.
Wait, really?
Yes. Because they cannot generate their own battery power internally, they are forced to manipulate, coerce, and extract validation from other people just to survive psychologically. They consume others because they are starving.
They're an emotional black hole. They aren't full of themselves. They're completely empty.
Precisely. Healthy selfishness, conversely, is rooted in psychological abundance. It is the realization that your life is a unique, irreplaceable phenomenon, and you have a duty to affirm its growth.
This aligns directly with Sam Vaknin's work in the source material. He takes a very blunt, almost evolutionary approach to this.
He does.
He states unequivocally, healthy egotism is self-love.
Vaknin establishes a ruthless hierarchy of needs. He argues that priority number one for any biological organism is survival. Priority number two is well-being.
Survival then well-being.
Yes, and nothing should ever usurp those two priorities. His argument isn't based on warm, fuzzy feelings. It is based on stark logic.
Right.
You cannot be an agent of positive change, you cannot protect your family, and you cannot act as a moral force in the world if you are dead, broken, or psychologically depleted.
So let's clarify a potential trap here, because I know what people might be thinking.
What's the trap?
When people hear prioritize your well-being above all else, the immediate reaction is often to confuse self-love with hedonism. People think, fantastic, priority number two is my well-being, so I'm going to skip work, eat a gallon of ice cream, max out my credit cards on a vacation, and ignore all my responsibilities because, hey, I am loving myself.
But that is hedonism, which is the pursuit of base, immediate pleasure. It is surrendering to what Freud called the id.
So how is true self-love different?
True self-love is the exact opposite of hedonism. Self-love often requires sacrificing present hedonic pleasure for the long-term stewardship of the self.
Stewardship, let's define that. It means the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to your care.
Yes. Self-love is acting as a responsible parent to yourself.
A responsible parent doesn't let a toddler eat ice cream for breakfast.
Exactly. It means shutting off the television and going to bed early because you know your body needs rest, even when you really want to stay up. It means initiating a highly uncomfortable conversation to set a boundary, rather than avoiding it for the sake of short-term peace.
Wow. So hedonism destroys the future self for the comfort of the present self. But self-love protects the future self.
That is beautifully put.
So we have the theory. But if someone is listening right now and wondering, am I practicing health stewardship or am I slowly tipping into that bottomless pit of narcissism? Our sources offer a phenomenal diagnostic tool.
Yes, Tarwell Will's research.
Right. Writing in Psychology Today, she lays out 4 key diagnostic questions to spot the difference in your own behavior. Let's analyze these.
The first question is incredibly revealing. Do you leverage your awesomeness against others?
Leveraging your awesomeness. What is the mechanism behind that?
Well, a person with healthy self-love can recognize their own brilliance. Say they are a fantastic public speaker, while simultaneously celebrating that their colleague is also a fantastic public speaker.
Right, because there's room for 2 great speakers.
Exactly. The existence of someone else's talent does not diminish their own. But a narcissist operates in a zero-sum reality. In order for them to feel more, someone else must systematically be made to feel less.
So they will subtly tear down the colleague's presentation to artificially elevate their own status.
Precisely. Question number 2. Are you more concerned with looking good than actually performing well?
Oh, this goes back to the inner void we talked about.
It does. Narcissists are obsessed with the performance of virtue or competence. They want the applause, the title, the optics of being a devoted partner or a brilliant employee.
But behind closed doors?
Behind closed doors, they are entirely apathetic about the actual quality of the work or how their actions affect others.
They just want the trophy without running the race.
Right, whereas a self-loving person derives intrinsic satisfaction from the mastery of the task itself. And they will take accountability when they fail because their ego is not tied to the illusion of perfection.
Question 3. Do you constantly seek external validation or status symbols?
Because a person with healthy self-love has an internal operating system that generates worth, they don't need a luxury car or a specific job title to prove they exist.
They have the battery power already.
Exactly. A narcissist requires external status symbols as psychological life support. Without external validation, they experience total ego fragmentation.
And the final diagnostic question, number 4. Are your emotions black and white, lacking tolerance for vulnerability?
Narcissistic individuals tend to utilize a defense mechanism called splitting.
Splitting, what does that look like?
It means people are either flawlessly perfect idols or entirely worthless enemies. There is no nuance.
You're either on a pedestal or in the trash.
Yes. And vulnerability, admitting a fear or mistake, is terrifying to them because it shatters that illusion of superiority.
Right.
Healthy self-love, however, provides the psychological safety net required to sit with extreme discomfort, to admit fault, and to be vulnerable. And paradoxically, that vulnerability is what creates genuine human connection.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you with a real-world scenario because this theory really needs to be stress-tested.
Let's do it.
Let's say it's Saturday morning. I have worked 60 hours this week. I am physically and emotionally destroyed. My phone rings, and it's a friend asking me to help him move a heavy couch across town.
A classic dilemma.
Right. Now, if I apply Vecnan's rule priority number 2 as my well-being, I should say, no, I am staying home to recover. But doesn't that just make me a terrible, selfish friend?
This is the exact scenario where the cultural script makes us stumble. We feel immense guilt for saying no, but the sources introduce a concept called inner bonding to explain why saying yes is actually the more toxic choice in this scenario.
Wait, how can helping a friend move a couch be toxic?
Look at the mechanism of what happens if you force yourself to go when you are utterly depleted. You are basically writing emotional checks from an overdrawn bank account.
Which means giving money you don't actually have.
Exactly. You show up at your friend's apartment, you are physically exhausted, you are radiating resentment, you are irritable. You aren't helping him out of an overflow of love, you are helping him out of a desperate fear of being labeled a bad friend or out of a martyr complex.
So the physical act is helpful, the couch gets moved, but the emotional undercurrent is literally poisoning the relationship.
Exactly. Narcissists expect you to bankrupt yourself for their convenience.
Right.
But self-loving people fill their own bank account first.
Right.
If you stay home and restore your nervous system on Saturday, you might disappoint your friend temporarily. But the next time he genuinely needs you, you will show up with actual energy, enthusiasm, and genuine altruism.
Pathological altruism giving when you have nothing left always breeds profound resentment and burnout.
It really does.
That completely reorients the moral compass. We aren't being selfish by resting. We are preserving our capacity to be genuinely useful to the tribe.
Exactly.
Now, if we can successfully strip away this fear of being labeled a narcissist, we are left with the reality of how we navigate our daily lives. And most people rely on that toxic social media app we mentioned earlier, self-esteem.
Unfortunately, yes.
But the research from Dr. Kristen Neff completely annihilates the concept of self-esteem.
Dr. Neff's work is really a watershed moment in clinical psychology. She exposes the fundamental mathematical flaw in how our culture pursues worth.
Let's walk through that mathematical flaw. In Western culture, we're constantly told to build our self-esteem. But what does that actually require?
Well, to maintain high self-esteem, you have to continually convince yourself that you are special and above average.
Okay, but mathematically, logically, it is a statistical impossibility for everyone to be above average simultaneously.
Right. If every single student in the class gets an A+, the A+ ceases to mean special. It just becomes the new mundane baseline.
Exactly. So what happens?
To sustain the illusion of being above average, self-esteem requires an environment of constant aggressive social comparison.
Wow.
Your psychological survival literally depends on scanning the room, identifying people who are less attractive, less successful, or less intelligent than you, and using their perceived inferiority to prop up your own ego.
It is a fundamentally predatory psychological state.
It absolutely is. And the data bears this out. High self-esteem, independent of self-compassion, is strongly correlated with narcissistic traits.
So the higher the self-esteem alone, the closer to narcissism.
Yes. When a person whose worth is entirely based on self-esteem encounters a threat, say, someone smarter enters the room, or they receive critical feedback, they don't process it rationally.
They freak out.
They experience an ego threat, which triggers the sympathetic nervous system. They become defensive, hostile, and aggressive to protect their status.
And we are seeing the catastrophic fallout of this esteem-based achievement culture in real time, aren't we? Particularly in how we are wiring the nervous systems of children.
Yes, it's very concerning.
The data provided from the Foundations for Emotional Wellness is genuinely terrifying. Let's look at it.
The clinical observations of the past 30 years show a massive shift. Perfectionism in children has risen by 10%, and a staggering 61% of teenagers report feeling immense chronic pressure to achieve perfect grades.
What does that look like on the ground? Because perfectionism used to be viewed as, a humble brag. Oh, my biggest flaw is that I'm just too much as a perfectionist, but this isn't a quirk anymore.
No, not at all. In the clinical realm, perfectionism is now recognized as a profound primary vulnerability for severe clinical anxiety and depressive disorders.
How does it manifest?
The warning signs are visceral. You see a 10-year-old child who experiences a total physiological meltdown, hyperventilating, literally tearing up their homework assignment because of a minor, easily erasable mathematical error.
It's an extreme overreaction to a microscopic threat.
Because to them, it isn't a microscopic threat. In an esteem-based culture, that error isn't a mistake. It is an exposure of their fundamental lack of worth.
Right. Going back to what we said earlier, the failure becomes their identity.
Yes. And this manifests as chronic procrastination, where the child is so paralyzed by the terror of not executing a task perfectly that their brain simply refuses to initiate the task at all.
So they just freeze.
They freeze. We also see a massive rise in psychosomatic symptoms, chronic stomach aches, migraines, and nausea before school. The body is literally rejecting the pressure.
And the sources point out that this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Parents are inadvertently downloading this malware into their children's brains.
They really are. Parents who hold themselves to impossible, punishing standards inevitably transmit that conditional reality to their children.
Even if they don't mean to.
Even if a parent says, "I love you no matter what," if the child watches the parent verbally abuse themselves over a burnt dinner or a missed promotion, the child learns the actual rule.
Which is?
Love and approval are strictly tethered to flawless execution.
Wow. Let me offer an analogy here to contrast the damage of self-esteem with the alternative.
Well, let's hear it.
Think of a seesaw on a playground, a plank balanced in the middle. If my psychological framework is self-esteem, I'm sitting on one end of that seesaw. The absolute only way I can elevate myself into the air is if I actively push someone else down.
Yes.
My elevation is inextricably linked to their depression. I rise because they fall.
That perfectly captures the zero-sum mechanics of social comparison.
But self-compassion is entirely different. Self-compassion isn't a seesaw. It is solid ground. Nobody has to be pushed into the dirt for me to stand up.
Exactly.
I can stand securely on my own 2 feet, and you can come stand securely right next to me, and neither of our positions threatens the other.
The solid ground analogy works beautifully because it highlights the stability of the system.
Right.
A seesaw fluctuates wildly. If you get a promotion, you shoot up. If you get reprimanded, you crash into the dirt. Your mood is a slave to external events.
But the solid ground doesn't move.
The solid ground of self-compassion does not move. Your fundamental worth remains perfectly stable whether you are succeeding brilliantly or failing miserably, because your worth is tied to your shared humanity, not your performance.
So the mandate is clear. Abandon the seesaw, build the solid ground. But this is where people get skeptical.
Naturally.
It sounds like a beautiful philosophical idea, but is it just feel-good poetry? The fascinating part of our research stack is that building the solid ground physically biologically alters the chemistry of your body.
This is where we move from philosophy into hard neurobiology.
Let's get into it.
The physiological data provided by ReachLink demonstrates that practicing self-compassion is not just a cognitive trick. It initiates a profound biological upgrade to your operating system.
Walk us through the exact mechanics. If I stop criticizing myself and start practicing self-compassion, what is literally happening in my bloodstream?
Let's start with the brain.
Right.
When you direct genuine compassion toward yourself, your brain triggers the release of oxytocin.
The bonding hormone.
Yes. This is widely known as the bonding hormone.
Uh-huh.
From an evolutionary perspective, oxytocin is released when a mother holds her infant or when you receive a deeply comforting embrace from a loved one. It signals profound safety to the mammalian brain.
But wait, I'm not hugging anyone. I'm just changing my internal monologue.
And that is the biological loophole.
A loophole is like a way to cheat the system, right?
Exactly. Your brain's neurochemistry cannot differentiate between external compassion received from a trusted friend and internal compassion generated by your own thoughts.
That is mind-blowing.
By changing your internal dialogue, you can literally flood your own nervous system with the biochemical equivalent of a hug.
You can hack your own oxytocin supply. That is incredible. What else happens?
It drastically improves what is known as vagal tone. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in the body, essentially serving as the superhighway of the parasympathetic nervous system, the system responsible for resting, digesting, and calming you down.
So a higher vagal tone means what exactly?
It means your nervous system is highly resilient. When a stressful event occurs, a car swerves into your lane, or your boss yells at you, your heart rate spikes. A person with high vagal tone can rapidly apply the neurological brakes and return their heart rate and breathing to a calm baseline state.
And self-compassion helps with this.
Yes, self-compassion exercises the vagus nerve, making it stronger and more efficient.
It's like upgrading the brakes on a sports car, and it extends into the immune system as well, correct?
Yes, significantly.
Yeah.
Chronic self-criticism is perceived by the brain as an internal threat, which keeps the body flooded with cortisol, the primary stress hormone.
Which is bad news.
Very bad news. High chronic cortisol degrades tissue and causes systemic inflammation. The data shows that self-compassion drastically lowers cortisol levels and specifically reduces an inflammatory marker called interleukin-6.
So by lowering chronic stress and inflammation, self-compassion actively boosts your immune function. You literally become more resistant to physical illness.
They do.
Okay. I am completely sold. I want the oxytocin loophole, I want the upgraded vagus nerve brakes, and I want the immune boost. How do we construct this? Dr. Neff outlines 3 foundational pillars of self-compassion. Let's dissect the architecture of this solid ground.
Pillar number 1 is self-kindness versus self-judgment. This sounds simple, but it is a radical behavioral shift.
Radical meaning extreme or far-reaching.
Right. It means actively, consciously choosing to speak to yourself with the exact same tone, vocabulary, and patience that you would use when speaking to a dear friend who is in pain.
So when I make a catastrophic error at work, instead of the default reflex of saying, I'm a complete idiot, I ruin everything I touch, what do I say?
You halt that narrative and replace it with, this is a really difficult moment. I made a significant error, and I feel embarrassed, but I'm doing the best I can right now.
So it is the deliberate cessation of the hostile inner critic.
Yes. Pillar number 2 is common humanity versus isolation.
This one is huge.
This is perhaps the most critical mechanism for dismantling shame. When humans experience failure or intense suffering, our evolutionary reflex is to pull away from the tribe. We isolate.
We hide.
Our brain tells us, I am the only person who has ever felt this uniquely incompetent. I am fundamentally broken.
Which compounds the pain. You have the pain of the failure plus the pain of the isolation.
Exactly. Recognizing common humanity requires you to intellectually reframe the suffering. You acknowledge that making mistakes, experiencing rejection, and feeling inadequate are not evidence of your defectiveness.
They're just part of the deal.
They are universal, non-negotiable requirements of the human experience. Your suffering doesn't separate you from the human race. It is the very thing that connects you to it.
Let me push back on this because it sounds dangerously close to invalidation.
How so?
If I am going through a brutal divorce and my life is falling apart and someone walks up to me and says, hey, don't worry, everyone gets divorced, it's a common human experience, I am going to be furious.
Of course.
That feels completely dismissive of my specific agony. How is that compassionate?
That is a vital distinction to make. Common humanity is not about minimizing the intensity or the validity of your specific acute pain. It is absolutely not saying your pain doesn't matter because millions of other people are also in pain.
And what is the psychological function of it?
Its sole function is to destroy the secondary layer of toxic shame.
Explain that.
When you're going through that brutal divorce, the primary pain is grief. It is unavoidable. But the secondary pain is shame. The agonizing thought that asks, what is uniquely unlovable and defective about me that caused this to happen? Common humanity intervenes to stop that specific shame spiral. It shifts the internal monologue from I am broken to this is simply what human beings feel when their hearts are broken. It removes the stigma of the suffering.
Wow. It doesn't extinguish the fire of the grief. It just stops you from pouring the gasoline of shame onto it. That makes perfect sense. What is the third pillar?
The third pillar is mindfulness versus over-identification. Mindfulness in this clinical context means the ability to observe your emotional pain and your negative thoughts with pure objective distance without allowing them to completely hijack your identity.
How does that play out in a moment of panic?
If you are over-identifying, you are entirely consumed by the emotion. You say, I am a failure, I am worthless. The emotion is you.
You merge with it.
Right. Mindfulness creates a cognitive gap. You take a breath and say, I am currently experiencing thought that I am a failure. I am observing a feeling of worthlessness in my body.
So you notice the weather pattern passing through your mind, but you do not confuse yourself with the storm.
Beautifully said.
To add some nuance to this, the clinical texts also introduce a tripartite model that divides self-compassion into two distinct forces, yin and yang. Now, in conversational English, we use yin and yang to describe opposing but complementary forces, like light and dark or hot and cold. How does compassion have opposing forces?
It is a brilliant framework because people often mistake compassion for pure softness. Yin self-compassion is indeed the soft, yielding, tender aspect. It is the gentle acceptance of your internal suffering.
Like nurturing.
Yes. It is the act of comforting and soothing yourself when you are profoundly hurt, much like a parent rocking a crying child.
But that's only half the equation. What is the yang?
Yang self-compassion is the fierce, protective, action-oriented aspect. It is the energy of a mama bear protecting her cubs.
Okay, so it has teeth.
It has teeth. Yang is setting an absolute rigid boundary. It is looking someone in the eye and saying no. It is the courage to quit a toxic job, leave an abusive relationship, or actively dismantle systems that are depleting your life force.
Wow.
You cannot survive on yin alone. You will be crushed. You need the yang to protect the space where the yin can heal you.
The tender nurse and the fierce bodyguard. You have to cultivate both. But the sources issue a very intense warning for anyone who is about to try this for the first time. They describe a psychological phenomenon called backdraft.
Yes, backdraft. It is a term lifted directly from firefighting mechanics.
What does it mean in firefighting?
If a fire breaks out in a sealed room, it eventually consumes all the available oxygen. The flames die down, and the fire just smolders in the dark, waiting.
It's just waiting for air.
Exactly. And the absolute second a firefighter kicks open the door, a massive rush of fresh oxygen floods the room. The fire immediately ignites that oxygen, causing a lethal, explosive fireball that blasts outward. That is a backdraft.
That is a terrifying visual. How does an explosion of fire relate to practicing self-compassion?
Well, if you have spent decades operating under the cultural script of self-criticism, denying your own needs and judging yourself harshly, the doors to your emotional core have been tightly sealed shut. Your trauma and your unmet needs have just been smoldering in the dark. When you finally stop the abuse, when you finally direct a moment of genuine, tender self-compassion toward yourself, you are kicking open the door.
Then the compassion acts as the oxygen.
Exactly. The sudden influx of unconditional love hits the historical trauma, and the psychological result is an explosion. Listeners who try this might suddenly find themselves weeping uncontrollably or overwhelmed by a surge of intense anger, grief, or deep shame.
So if a listener tries to be kind to themselves tomorrow and they suddenly feel worse, if they feel an explosion of negative emotion, they shouldn't panic and think they broke the system.
Not at all. It is actually the ultimate proof that the system is working.
Really?
Yes. The pain is not being created. It is finally being released. The historical wounds are coming to the surface because the environment is finally safe enough to process them.
So how do you handle it safely?
The key is to anticipate the backdraft. You don't run into the burning room all at once. You crack the door, let a little oxygen in, process the emotion, and manage the pace of your own healing.
That is profound. Now, it's one thing to discuss these concepts in the abstract safety of a podcast studio, well, a deep dive discussion like this. It is another entirely to prove that they work in the most brutal, culturally complex environments on Earth.
Yes, the real-world application.
Right. To do that, we are looking at an absolutely fascinating peer-reviewed study published in PLOS Mental Health. It examines adults living with obesity in Indonesia.
This study is a monumental piece of literature because it takes these clinical frameworks and stress tests them against extreme culturally embedded stigma. It proves the universal biological efficacy of self-compassion.
Let's lay the groundwork for why this study matters globally. What is the context?
The broader context is the staggering trajectory of the global obesity crisis. We are currently looking at over 1.9 billion adults worldwide who are classified as overweight, with over 650 million living with obesity.
And the projections.
Epidemiological projections suggest that by 2050, that number could surge to 3.8 billion adults.
That is nearly half the projected global population. And the focus of the study isn't the physical health metrics, right? It's the psychological devastation.
Exactly. The psychosocial impacts are catastrophic. Individuals living with obesity face pervasive, daily weight stigma, severe discrimination in healthcare and employment, drastically lowered self-esteem, and a vastly diminished quality of life. The psychological toll is immense.
Now, to fully grasp the brilliance of this specific study in Indonesia, our listeners need to understand a massive blind spot in modern science. There is an acronym in psychology, WEIRD, W-E-I-R-D.
Yes, weird societies.
It stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. Explain the WEIRD bias to us.
Historically, an overwhelming majority of psychological studies have been conducted on university students in weird societies, primarily the United States, Canada, and Western Europe.
Okay, and what's the issue with that?
These societies share a highly individualistic cultural framework. In an individualistic culture, your identity is autonomous. You are an island. Therefore, the societal stigma around obesity in weird cultures is often framed as a moral failure of individual willpower.
So the shaming comes from media representations, strangers on the street, or systemic discrimination.
Yes, but Indonesia operates on a completely different psychological operating system. It is not a weird society.
Far from it. Indonesia is deeply collectivistic.
Right. In a collectivistic culture, the concept of a totally autonomous individual barely exists. Your core identity is inextricably interwoven with your family unit, your community, and relational harmony.
Your body isn't just your body.
Exactly. Your physical body and your behaviors are often viewed as a direct reflection of your family's status and honor.
So how does weight stigma manifest when your body is considered communal property?
It manifests through a phenomenon researchers call family fat talk.
Family fat talk.
In Indonesia, the primary source of stigma isn't a stranger on a bus. It is persistent, normalized, weight-related teasing, unsolicited advice, and overt shaming coming directly from parents, siblings, and extended relatives during daily social interactions.
Which is uniquely lethal to mental health. I mean, if a stranger insults me, I can write them off as a jerk. My core identity isn't threatened.
Right.
But if my family, the very people who define my existence in a collectivistic culture, is constantly bombarding me with family fat talk, there is nowhere to hide. The psychological radiation is inside the house.
It is inescapable, and that is exactly why the researchers chose this population. They surveyed 200 adults with obesity in Indonesia to answer one critical question. In an environment where the cultural stigma is this intimate and this intense, what internal psychological mechanism actually allows a person to achieve stable self-acceptance?
And the researchers went in with a very logical hypothesis. They assumed that a foundation of self-love combined with a positive body image would directly predict whether these individuals could accept themselves.
That was the assumption.
But the data proved them completely wrong.
The statistical modeling yielded a massive surprise. When they ran the regression analysis, neither self-love nor body image had a significant direct effect on global self-acceptance.
Wait, so loving yourself didn't lead to accepting yourself?
Not directly. Instead, self-compassion emerged as the undisputed dominant force. Self-compassion was the strongest positive predictor, explaining an astonishing 40.6% of the variance in self-acceptance.
For our listeners who don't read statistical abstracts for fun, explaining 40.6% of the variance in human behavior is astronomical. It means self-compassion is the primary engine driving their psychological survival.
It really is.
But the study gets even deeper into the mechanics by examining something called a mediating effect.
Yes, the mediation analysis is where the true power of self-compassion is revealed.
Let's define mediating effect through context. If I want to drive from my house to a specific island, and the only way to get there is by driving across a specific bridge, then the bridge is the mediator.
Okay, good analogy.
It is the required pathway. If the bridge collapses, I can't reach the island.
That is a perfect structural analogy. The researchers found that body image fully mediated the relationship between self-love and self-acceptance.
So what does that mean in practice?
This means that having a general sense of self-love only resulted in self-acceptance if it successfully managed to change how the individual viewed their physical body. The pathway had to cross the bridge of body image.
Oh, I see.
If they still hated their body, the self-love couldn't reach the destination of self-acceptance.
The bridge was blocked, but the pathway for self-compassion worked differently.
Entirely differently. Body image only partially mediated self-compassion. Self-compassion maintained a massive, direct superhighway straight to self-acceptance, completely bypassing the need for a positive body image.
Okay, let's translate this statistical math into human reality. What does that actually mean for the person sitting at a family dinner in Indonesia, listening to their relatives criticize their weight?
It means that self-compassion is a dual-pathway superpower. If you practice self-compassion, you can achieve a stable, profound sense of self-worth and total self-acceptance, even if you still struggle with how your body looks.
That is amazing.
You don't have to fix your body image to save your mind. Self-compassion regulates the emotional distress independently of the physical evaluation.
I am visualizing this, and I want to offer an analogy. In this deeply collectivistic culture where the opinions of your family literally define your reality, family fat talk is basically a toxic airborne virus.
It is.
If you rely on self-esteem or body image, you are walking into that toxic environment in a t-shirt. You will be infected. But self-compassion acts as an invisible psychological hazmat suit.
A hazardous material suit, exactly.
You zip up the self-compassion hazmat suit and you can walk right into the living room, sit through the toxic barrage of familial criticism, and the shame simply bounces off the visor.
It repels it.
It does not penetrate your skin or contaminate your core worth. You remain insulated.
That is exactly how the mechanism functions. It buffers the internal self from the external environment. And there's a fascinating cultural nuance here as well.
Oh, what is it?
In Indonesian society, overt displays of self-love or high self-esteem often violate strict cultural norms regarding modesty and humility. Bragging or elevating yourself above the group is deeply frowned upon.
So you can't just walk around acting like you're the best.
Right. But self-compassion, because it relies on the pillar of common humanity, perfectly aligns with the collectivistic values of empathy, harmony, and interconnectedness. It allows individuals to protect themselves without violating their cultural code.
It is culturally congruent armor. It is a brilliant study that takes these concepts out of the self-help aisle and proves they are vital survival mechanics.
Absolutely.
So we have built the foundation. We understand the precise vocabulary. We have explored the biology of the vagus nerve and the oxytocin loop. We have the empirical data from Indonesia. Now we reached the climax of the deep dive.
The application phase.
Exactly. How do you, the person listening to this right now, actually implement this in your daily life? How do you build the hazmat suit tomorrow morning?
The clinical texts provide incredibly clear, actionable protocols, primarily drawn from cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Where do we start?
The very first step is a process called cognitive restructuring. Before you can build compassion, you must identify and dismantle the cognitive distortions that fuel your inner critic. The most common distortion is all-or-nothing thinking, driven by absolute language.
Absolute language. Words like always, never, completely or ruined.
Precisely. You spill coffee on your shirt and your brain says, I always ruin everything. You have to catch that absolute language in real time and restructure it to reflect reality.
So what's the restructured version?
I spilled coffee on a shirt.
Yeah.
It is a minor inconvenience. It has zero bearing on my competence as a human being.
You audit your own internal script. What is the next step?
The next step is a classic CBT intervention known as a behavioral experiment.
Oh.
And this is going to terrify the perfectionist listening. A behavioral experiment requires you to deliberately construct a controlled mistake to test your catastrophic assumptions.
Wait, you want the perfectionist to deliberately make a mistake?
Yes. The protocol suggests something minor, but highly uncomfortable. For example, write an email to a colleague, deliberately leave an obvious typographical error in the second sentence, and hit send.
Oh my God.
And do not correct it.
My heart rate just spiked just thinking about doing that. That violates every instinct a high achiever has.
And that spike in heart rate is exactly why you must do it. The purpose of the behavioral experiment is essentially exposure therapy.
Okay, explain that.
Your brain has convinced you that if you are imperfect, you will be rejected, fired, and cast out of the tribe. You hit send on the typo, and then you sit there and you observe reality.
And what happens?
The world does not end. Your boss does not fire you. The building does not burn down. Through direct, visceral experience, you force your nervous system to habituate to the reality that imperfection is entirely survivable.
You are proving to your amygdala that a typo is not a tiger. That is terrifying, but incredibly effective. Another actionable step highlighted in our research involves fostering a growth mindset through the strategic use of a single English word.
Yes, the power of yet.
The word yet is a cognitive game changer. When you encounter a massive failure or a daunting obstacle, a fixed mindset defaults to a definitive statement of inadequacy. I can't do this.
Which signals a permanent limitation.
Exactly. By simply appending the word yet to the end of the sentence, you fundamentally alter the cognitive framing.
Can't do this yet.
Right. Yet implies a trajectory. It reframes a permanent state of failure into a temporary state of learning. It leaves the door open for future mastery.
It's a tiny linguistic shift with a massive psychological ripple effect.
But what about in the immediate heat of the moment? Let's say I don't make a deliberate typo. Let's say I genuinely make a massive mistake during a presentation, and the shame is flooding my system right then and there. What is the immediate protocol?
For acute distress, you deploy Dr. Neff's 3-step self-compassion break. It is designed to take less than 30 seconds, and it manually overrides the sympathetic nervous system.
Okay, step 1.
Step 1. You mindfully acknowledge the pain without spiraling. You say internally, this is a moment of suffering.
You label the reality. This is suffering.
Step 2. You immediately invoke the pillar of common humanity to block the shame. You say, suffering is a normal part of life. Other people feel exactly as panicked as I do right now.
You connect yourself back to the human race. And step 3.
You apply the self-kindness. You place a hand over your heart, which physically helps trigger the oxytocin release. And you offer yourself a mantra of support. May I be kind to myself in this moment. May I give myself the compassion I need.
This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a part of life. May I be kind to myself. It acts as a manual reset switch for the vagus nerve.
It really does.
Now, our sources from BetterHelp emphasize 2 broader lifestyle strategies to maintain this operating system: radical forgiveness and auditing your circle. Let's start with radical forgiveness.
Radical forgiveness recognizes that holding on to past errors and endlessly ruminating over them is a covert form of continuous self-judgment.
You're just punishing yourself over and over again.
You are keeping the trauma alive to punish yourself. To build self-acceptance, you must look at the mistake, extract whatever logical lesson it holds, and then deliberately, actively let the emotional weight of it go.
Like forgiving a debt.
Yes. You refuse to continue paying interest on a debt you have already settled.
And what does auditing your circle mean?
It relies on the sociological law of averages. There's a well-documented concept that your psychological baseline is the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
Okay, so look at your friends.
Right. If your inner circle consists of highly critical, judgmental perfectionists who constantly gossip or tear themselves down, you will inevitably internalize their vocabulary and their tone. Your inner voice will begin to mimic their hostility.
We absorb the language of our peers.
We do. Therefore, to sustain self-compassion, you must ruthlessly audit your environment. You must actively surround yourself with individuals who model grace, who admit their own failures, and who extend compassion to themselves and others.
You have to change the culture of your immediate ecosystem.
Yes.
Which perfectly transitions to the final actionable point, specifically for the parents listening. We talked earlier about the perfectionism epidemic in children. How do parents stop passing this toxic baton to the next generation? How do we break the cycle of conditional worth?
The clinical consensus is unanimous on this. The single most effective intervention for children is parent modeling.
Not just telling them what to do.
No, children do not learn emotional regulation from lectures. They learn it from observing real-time mechanics. You cannot just tell your kids that it's okay to make mistakes. You have to demonstrate it viscerally.
Give me a scenario. How do I demonstrate that?
You have to narrate your own failures out loud, and you must do it with a calm, accepting tone. If you completely burn the family dinner, you do not curse, throw the pan, and call yourself an idiot while your child watches.
You don't model the meltdown.
No. You take a breath, smile, and say out loud, "Oops, I completely burned the dinner. Oh, well, everyone makes mistakes, even me. I guess we are ordering pizza tonight."
You are literally providing them with the script. You are showing them the hazmat suit in action.
Yes.
Yeah.
You must demonstrate that your house does not have to be flawlessly clean, that you are perfectly comfortable with an outcome being just good enough, and most importantly, that your core love for them and for yourself is utterly untethered from achievements or failures.
Okay, I have one final pushback.
Bring it on.
It's the elephant in the room. I know there are highly driven, ambitious, type A listeners who have been following this entire deep dive, but they have a nagging fear.
I know exactly what they're thinking.
They're thinking, look, this sounds lovely, but my harsh inner critic is the engine of my success. If I put on this hazmat suit, if I accept myself exactly as I am, flaws and all, I will lose my edge. I will lose my drive. I will just sit on the couch eating potato chips and never achieve anything great.
Right.
How do we reconcile unconditional self-acceptance with intense ambition?
That is the ultimate fear of the perfectionist, and it is a complete illusion. The clinical research delivers a knockout psychological punch to that exact fear.
What does the data say?
Extensive studies, including those on athletic and academic performance, prove definitively that self-compassion actually increases motivation and achievement.
I need you to explain the mechanics of that. Why wouldn't it make you lazy?
Think about the underlying neurobiology. If your motivation is entirely driven by the whip of harsh self-criticism, every single failure registers as a traumatic existential blow to your ego.
So it hurts a lot.
The pain of failure is so agonizing that your brain eventually becomes terrified of the risk.
And fear leads to paralysis.
Exactly. It leads to severe procrastination, risk aversion, and eventual burnout. You stop trying new, ambitious things because the psychological penalty for failing is emotional devastation.
But what if you use self-compassion?
When you operate from the solid ground of unconditional self-acceptance, you are no longer terrified of the self-flagellation that follows failure. Because you know you will be kind to yourself when you fall, you are actually much more willing to take massive, bold risks. You're willing to push the boundaries of your potential because the fear of the whip is gone.
Because the penalty for failure is just a bruised knee, not a shattered identity.
Precisely. You still want to grow, you still want to achieve greatness, but the fuel source changes. You change your behaviors and pursue your goals because you care about yourself and want to construct the best possible future for your life, not because you hate yourself and are desperately trying to fix your inherent brokenness.
You change because you care about yourself, not because you hate yourself. That is profound.
Yeah.
It's the difference between running toward a goal out of joy versus running away from a predator in pure terror.
Right.
Both make you run fast, but one destroys your heart in the process.
It is the fundamental difference between merely surviving and genuinely thriving.
Let's synthesize this epic journey we have been on today. We have systematically dismantled the cultural lie. You, the listener, have learned that prioritizing your own psychological survival is not a narcissistic sin. It is the biological prerequisite for being a functional, loving human being.
It is the concrete foundation.
You cannot pour water from an empty cup, and you cannot run a power grid on a dying generator. We have mapped out the precise vocabulary of the self, identifying why we must abandon the toxic, exhausting, zero-sum seesaw of self-esteem and instead pour the solid concrete foundation of self-compassion.
You now understand the neurobiology of the oxytocin loophole, the protective mechanics of the vagus nerve. and the necessity of balancing the tender yin with the fierce yang.
We have seen the empirical proof from the collectivistic culture of Indonesia, where the invisible hazmat suit of self-compassion acts as the ultimate shield against the most intimate, inescapable forms of stigma. You have the CBT protocols to restructure your absolute language, the courage to execute a behavioral experiment with a deliberate typo, and the wisdom to use the word yet to leave the door open for your own growth.
Yes, the tools are all there.
And hopefully you have absorbed the English vocabulary necessary to rewrite the code of your own internal operating system.
You are now equipped with the precise linguistic and psychological tools to become the most responsible steward of your own life.
So we leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you step back into your day. I want you to close your eyes, if you can, and picture the person you love the most in this entire world. Picture their face clearly. Think about the infinite well of patience you have for them. Think about the immediate grace you offer them when they make a foolish mistake, and the fierce, uncompromising protection you provide when they stumble and fall.
Hold that feeling.
Now imagine what your life would look like if you realized right in this very moment that the person most deserving of that exact same love, that exact same patience, and that exact same fierce protection has been you all along. If you truly believe that, what is the very first thing you would do differently tomorrow morning? Take a deep, self-compassionate breath. Build the solid ground, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.